Good, thank you. So I'm John Houghton, and this is our first little known lady, Nassau. She is a Potawatomi chiefess, and if you are a very observant person, I will admit, going right off the bat, that she's actually from Fulton County, so my apologies, don't tell anybody. She was from Bruce Lake, as we call it today. In her day, it was the camp of Chief Kawane, and of course, confusingly, they later named someplace else after him. So you've got Kiwana and Bruce Lake, but Chief Kawane actually lived at Bruce Lake, as she did. Her father had been a chief, and one of the things that the early treaties with the Potawatomi provided often was that a cabin would be built for the chief of the local reservation. And in fact, in this painting, you can see in the back, I guess I need this after all. Here's Nassau, and in the back, you can see her little two-story cabin. And her cabin is partly relevant to this story because it made her kind of a local hostess, not quite a hotel, certainly, but people came to stay with her. And when they had conferences or treaty sessions at Lake Bruce, as they did in at least one famous occasion, she often hosted the whole thing. This painting, I should say, is by George Winter, who was a guy from England who coincidentally happened to be on the frontier at just the right time. He had come from England to New York thinking that New York could be adventurous, and it wasn't adventurous enough, so then he came to Logansport, obviously a center of wild abandon. He was possibly a professionally trained painter. We're not entirely sure about that, but certainly a professional painter in the sense he was trying to sell what he painted. There were two books of his paintings. This one is from the 30s, Jeff? 40s. And from the 40s, published by the State Historical Society. And this one, more recently, has everything that he painted down to the kind of things that he sketched on the backs of napkins, along with notes and his biography. So either of them, they're both here in the library, I'm reasonably sure, and we have them down in Culver as well. So George Winter painted all these people, including Nassau, and he also wrote about meeting them. So we know a lot about things about her because of things that George Winter said from staying in her hotel, such as it was. We know, for instance, that she had a good deal of money. She was married to a French trader, and you can see this illustrated in the fact that she's wearing money around her neck in the picture, right? Those are all silver coins in the picture around her. I don't know how she came by all of her money, but she was a good poker player, Winter reports, among other things. And many a person apparently thought that he could take easy advantage of this red-skinned woman and then found out that their prejudices were wrong in more than one way. She was also good at euchre, which strikes me as odd for somebody in the 1840s. I didn't think euchre had caught on that early, but it did. And Winter, of course, the fact that she had a great sense of humor. In this case, I think he was the victim of it, but she had a daughter who was also one of the subjects of a painting by Winter. And the daughter had a boyfriend who was also a French trader, as her father was. So Nassau assisted in getting the boyfriend made up to look like a Potawatomi chief. So she introduced him to George Winter and said, well, you've been painting us, and obviously you're a very keen observer of detail. You know what a Potawatomi looks like exactly, and you're the best person to ever draw a Potawatomi, and so on and so on and so forth. So here's our friend who just came in from out of town, and I'm sure that as you've been studying us Potawatomi, sure you'd like to make a painting of him as well. And eventually then she sprung the joke that this was not in fact a Potawatomi, but another white guy. She was not just a prankster and a card player. She was a notable figure in the relationships between the Potawatomi and the incoming Americans. The big council of Kiwane was held, as I said, surrounding her place in the summer of 37, I guess. She left in 38. In the interim, she had been, in 36, she had been invited to sign a treaty, which is important to us here because it was a treaty about Menominee leaving his reservation. And famously, Menominee himself did not sign the treaty saying that Menominee needed to leave his reservation. So the Indian agent tried to get as many other people to sign it as he could, just so it would look like a good arrangement. And there were 13 people who signed it who had nothing at all to do with our area. Nassau is one of them. So she's considered prestigious enough for the Indian agent to get her signature to back up his fake document to drive out our local Potawatomi. As I said, she left in 38. That was these treaties all had a 2-year leave-by date. So 38 was she left, went out to Kansas, and then became or continued to be very active in tribal affairs. So that one of the developments out there was that the government deliberately mixed together Potawatomi from various areas, so people from Illinois, people from Indiana, and to some degree they resorted. There was a lot of intermarriage and people doing one thing or another, but the government offered the opportunity to become the owner of your own land rather than being part of a communally owned tribal property. So some people took advantage of that and some people didn't. So they re-split then into two different bands of different nations of Potawatomi. Most of our folks, as near as I can tell, went with the group that had individual land ownership, and along with that became United States citizens. So they are known as the Citizen Nation Potawatomi, and they end up not in Kansas but in Oklahoma eventually. So she's active in this group, and they adopt a sort of interim early treaty constitution, which provides that the heads of families can do this, that, and the other thing. And 5 years later, they go back to it, or several years later, they go back to it, and Nassau now has clearly put her foot down, because in the second version, the phrase about male heads of families has been taken out. So now women can be the heads of families, and women can be involved in treaty affairs. So clearly, Nassau was not going to be pushed to the sidelines now that she was involved in affairs far away from her homeland here. The other reason that we remember her, related to that picture, is her progeny, I guess, for lack of a better word. So I said she was married to a French trader named Gosselin. They had a daughter named Elizabeth, who married another guy, Potawatomi French, named Jacob Vieux. And Jacob has a daughter, and she has a daughter named Charlotte. Charlotte marries a guy who's Sac and Fox on one side and Irish on the other, named Hiram Thorpe. And Hiram Thorpe and Charlotte's son is James Francis Thorpe, better known as Jim Thorpe, the American Olympian. So this is him down in the corner. The other side. And you probably remember about Jim Thorpe. He went to the Olympics, won Olympic medals, then had them taken away because he had played semi-pro baseball, I believe it was. And eventually the Olympic Committee did give his medals back, so posthumously he was returned to his status as an Olympian. My second person is Emma Sewell Lord, and that's her tombstone you see there. Emma Lord was the preeminent woman of business in Culver in the 1880s, 1890s, early 1900s. And I gave a full talk about her here several years ago that's available on the Historical Society website. So I'm going to try to not talk too much about her today, since you can go back and see everything, and since I have a head full of information about Emma Lord and would talk about her for 3 hours if not prevented by somebody who had been slapping me. This is her tombstone, as I said, and as is the great thing about tombstones, everything on it is a lie. That wasn't her name, that isn't when she was born, that is when she died, I guess, so that part is good. The building, still standing, is her home and the hotel that she built. I'll tell you how we got to that stage. So the Lords came to Culver basically along with the railroad. They were from Indianapolis. She had been married to her husband Ralph in 1881, perhaps I should say married to her husband Ralph in 1881. He had been a blacksmith. They owned a boarding house that was destroyed in a disastrous fire in 1882. 2 people were killed. And they were kind of looking for something else to do. Well, that was exactly the time that the railroad was coming through Culver and up to Plymouth. So they come to Marmont, as it then was, in 1884, and they get a launch. There's a steamboat named William P. McKean, not a name that any of us would remember, but William P. McKean was the president of the Vandalia Railroad. So clearly they were at least currying favor with the railroad, if indeed there wasn't some sort of Logansport Railroad backing behind them. But in case this is one of the early steam launches that was there on the lake to pick people up from the park, take them off to somebody's cottage, or just take people on tours around the lake, or just to make it easier to get from Maxinkuckee into town. After all, that was in those days was a bit of a ride in a horse and buggy. So they become early leaders in the boating business, not as early as the Morrises. We were talking earlier about the Morris family, who were the first boating family on the lake. But they get heavily involved in this, and Captain Ward is recognized as one of the pioneers of that business. He was a heavy drinker and a brutal drinker, apparently. And after they opened this cottage hotel in 1887, he was in kind of a downward spiral. So they consider, people in town are concerned, they consider what to do about it. And in 1889, they had been thinking about maybe committing him. The Lords were the next door neighbors of my great-grandfather. So this was all very much family stuff. The Lords were an issue. Because they were thinking about committing him, and in the early spring of 1889, he goes down, takes a small boat out on the lake, kills himself gruesomely. We have the records of the coroner's report here, but he dealt himself a fatal wound with a straight razor, having previously tied a sash weight to his foot with a bit of rope. So he threw himself overboard before he had a chance to die from the razor wound. So it was terrible. But it didn't slow his wife down for a second, maybe a second, but not for 2 seconds. She continued the hotel business. She bought more boats. She had the help of a guy with the unfortunate name of Captain Crook, who was, as far as I can tell, actually the only honest person in this story. But in case Captain Crook runs the boats for her while she goes about other things. She takes over management of the Colony Hotel, which was that sort of fabulous place directly across from the park. Eventually burned down. There's a picture of it burning, or a picture of it not burning, on the side of the Culver Fire Department. She invested in hog farming southwest of Culver, ran a hog farm for a while. She worked herself into a stroke. And Captain Crook, loyal to a fault, takes her all over to see doctors, takes her up to Ann Arbor to see people at the University of Michigan. In 1902, she sells him the boats, to Captain Crook. And the deal is that he pays her too much money for them. He recognizes that it's way too much money, but the money's going to support her in her old age, and she promises in her will that she will give the property back to him, so he'll get it back in the long run. In 1903, she has a young woman who's been working around the house for her, leaves her employ, and strangely makes the same arrangement that Mrs. Lord remember her in her will. In 1904, Crook mortgages the boats back to her, so he now owes her both the original money and the mortgage. So he's up to his neck in debt to Emma Lord. She has a millinery shop in town briefly in 1905, and in 1906 she has a second stroke and dies. And the Citizen cannot get over it. The front page of the Culver Citizen has like 3.5 columns about the Grim Reaper has come to Culver and 2 people died, and every detail of Mrs. Lord's life and funeral is recorded. How many people brought flowers, what color they were, where they left them in her house, and everything is covered in infinite detail. And so the Citizen's printed, she's buried, and then the lawyers come out. Because it turns out that she has died without leaving a will, and so her biggest creditor then sues to be appointed as the administrator, and the previously appointed administrator says, hey, I'm just, trying to do my job here. Then Captain Crook's lawyer appears and says, hey, my boy has a will that he had signed, because that was how he's going to get the boats back. And I'm not saying Captain Crook was suspicious of Mrs. Lord, God forbid, but when they signed the will, he had the will left at the bank in the care of the bank woman. This was the guy who owned the bank before, W.O. Osborne. And so they contact the bank guy, and he says, well, yeah, they left it here, and then Mrs. Lord came and got it. I haven't seen it since then. So it turns out that everybody is suing everybody for all of the debts that anybody, you can imagine how this blossomed. And the courts are kept busy because the executors want to sell off the property. They want Captain Crook to pay for the boats. He's not going to pay for the boats. They eventually reach an agreement with him for 10 cents on the dollar, whatever it is. So Captain Crook is up in the house going through the papers of Mrs. Lord. And if you're going to be a con woman, you have to be a really, really thorough con woman, and she apparently wasn't quite thorough enough, because it's now 1910. He's going through the papers. he finds a photo of her as a young woman. And he remembers that she had said something once about visiting her cousins in Ohio. So he gets an attorney from Fort Wayne, an attorney named Capron, who's actually the son of a famous judge here in South Bend, here in Plymouth, and says, here's a photo, go to Ohio and find this woman. So apparently the Capron guy goes door to door in Western Ohio for I don't know how long. He eventually finds somebody from the Wainmeyer family living 20 miles from Dayton, and says, do you recognize this picture of Mrs. Lord? And he says, well, yeah, I recognize the picture, but that isn't who you say it is. That's my cousin Nettie, Jeanette. Oop is right. So it turns out that Nettie had been orphaned at age 6 and been raised by a family named Cook, who had moved to Indiana. Moved to Indiana with her, in fact. So off goes Mr. Capron to Indiana, to the Cook family. Well, old Mr. Cook is dead, but young Mr. Cook is still alive. He's the same age as Nettie. And he says, oh yeah, I remember Nettie perfectly well. You know, she had a husband and a daughter. They're living in Muncie. So Capron goes off to Muncie, finds this young woman, and so by then I think she'd actually moved to Zionsville. But in any case, he finds her and says, you know, you might like to come with me to Plymouth, Indiana, where there's a trial going on that involves your family and an estate. So she comes up here, and it turns out, as I said, that everything is a lie. She was born in Ohio. She ran off with a guy who was 30 when she was 12, or maybe 15. She lied about her age, too, so it's hard to tell all these things. So with this first husband, she had a child. He was still alive. The daughter was still alive. The court was amazed. And, of course, by then, the court had given away or sold off most of the property, so they couldn't get a lot of it back. The sale was a sale. But eventually they decided, well, you're clearly the woman's sole heir. Your father's here. You look a little bit like her. I think I made a picture. There they are. The mother's on the left, daughter's on the right. And they said, you know, here, you can have what's left. It took another 2 years, but she eventually got she was named the Administrator de Boni Snow, the administrator of the things that hadn't been given away, and vanished into the sunset with her son and her money, as far as I know. So my third is Frida Mariana Charlotte Brierly Wolford. And now this is not Frida in the picture. So on the right is Ernest Berger Benson, who was the longtime dean of Culver Academies. In the center is Pete Trone, who was the director of Culver's Woodcraft Camp and involved in all sorts of things in Marshall County. And on the left is Ace Bird, who is retiring in that picture. This is a story about Ace Bird's in-laws, the Millers. The Millers were from Chicago. Ace married a young Miss Miller, and he, along with it, got this strange group of people. His father had died, his father-in-law had died relatively early, and he had a brother-in-law named Bruce, and Bruce, seeking his fortune, apparently Chicago wasn't big enough territory for him, so Bruce went to New York to seek, a bigger life than he could find in Chicago. Meanwhile, in New York, there was this lady named Frida, all those names I just said, Brierly. We know about this whole story because Frida's family, one of Frida's family, wrote a book called Frida's Locket. We have a copy of it down in the Culver Library. There may be others around. It's by Paula Williams, who is her great-granddaughter. She has a great deal more to say about her family than I would ever dare to say about my family, certainly, but she covers all these details. Frida Brierly had been born in Germany, in Bremerhaven, and she had a brother who lived in New York. You see where this is headed. And so as a young woman, 18 or 19, she comes over from Germany to live with her brother in New York. And living as a young woman in New York is not as exciting as she thinks it should be in 1911. And so all she has from home is her locket, and she feels sad and one thing or another. She falls in love with the guy who delivers coal to her brother's apartment. Now you can see, surprisingly enough, the guy who delivers the coal to her brother's apartment is Bruce Miller. So they fall in love. The older members of the Brierly family do not approve of their little sister falling in love with a black guy from Chicago. It's not entirely clear to me that they could be legally married in New York. There were still anti-race mixing laws in a lot of the states. But in any case, they get married more or less and travel back to Chicago. They don't like living in Chicago. It's dirty, it's smelly, it's ugly. So they come down to Culver because Ace is already working in Culver. He's working at the, what eventually becomes the Culver-area in several of his earlier incarnations. In fact, he stayed at Culver until his retirement. In his later years, he came back to work as the head janitor of the Woodcraft camp, just because he liked to spend summers in Culver. He's living in, I think, California by that point. In any case, they come to live with the Millers. The war comes along, I mean with the Birds, rather. The war comes along, they go off, and when they come back, Ace still is able to get his brother-in-law, Bruce, a job working at the academy as a waiter or whatnot. He eventually notices that Bruce is having trouble carrying plates and trays, and is becoming more short-tempered, and after a while he can't make enough excuses to keep Bruce at work at the academy, and then after a little while he can't make excuses for Bruce anymore, and in fact Bruce is declared insane in November of 1923. Again, we have the documents right up here in the next room if you want to read them yourself. Temporary insanity on Tuesday afternoon, November 20th, because on Monday night, November 19th, he'd attacked his wife, described in the paper as a German woman. She ran out of the house and called for help. His mother came and tried to help. She was asked to leave. It turns out that the Miller family have Huntington's chorea, a hereditary disease that we often associate with Woody Guthrie. It results in neuromuscular problems, a lack of coordination. This is why he couldn't keep his job as a waiter. It eventually begins to affect your mind. People have delusions. And it's particularly cruel as a genetic disease because it results from, as I was reading, the duplication of just a set of very short of those DNA code letters that we always hear about. And from generation to generation, they can pile up. So if you have it, not only can you pass it on to your descendants, but it can get worse for them than it was for you. So it had been going on in the Miller family for some years, and almost all of the Millers in this family, not all of them, but many of them developed this disease as time goes by. In any case, so Bruce Miller is taken off to various state hospitals. He ends up in Logansport eventually. Frida has their children, including one who is born just 8 months and 23 days after he's put in the institution. A daughter named Frida Charlotte, who grows up with the Culver High School class of 1942, and the same class as my cousin Thomas and Bob May, who used to own the bar down in Culver. So she has to make life work. She's assisted by Ace Bird and her sister and other members of the family. She strikes up a romance with a local barber. So Ace Bird, who's had about enough of people carrying on, apparently, Ace Bird goes to see the barber and says, make an honest woman out of my sister-in-law, or stop. The barber leaves town. So Frida gets a job working for Mrs. O'Callahan. Mrs. O'Callahan was the wife, I think at this point maybe the widow, of the then Culver band director. And at some point, something gets broken in the O'Callahan household that can't be fixed. And Mrs. O'Callahan calls on Roy Wolford, who's the academy blacksmith, to come over and fix this or make a new what's-it for her. Well, she does, and true to form, Frida falls in love with the guy who's come to visit the house. This is a recurring pattern. And so she eventually decides that she's going to run off with Roy Wolford. They have a child, and Frida tells Ace and his wife Elsie that she can't take care of her kids anymore. Elsie says, well, fine, I'll take care of them, I'll raise them, but if I'm gonna raise them, you have to be gone. I'm not gonna do this business of being, auntie part of the time and mommy part of the time, either one or the other. So Frida leaves completely and is never seen again and stops going by her first name. She's not in fact known as Frida. It's her tombstone, and you'll notice it starts with Mary Ann, not with Frida. So her family in Tyosa know nothing about her previous mixed-race family in Culver. And she maintains this distance to such a degree that when one of her children, one of her grandchildren from the Culver family, wants to meet with her, and just to get back in touch, she insists on taking the Indiana motor bus to South Bend so they can talk on the bus and talk in South Bend, but not be seen by people from Tyosa, so they will never know about her other family. And indeed, reading her obituaries in the Rochester paper, there's not a mention of the fact that she knew anybody, she was married to anybody before Mr. Wolford. He was a widower, and I think there's a mention of his earlier family, but there's nothing about her earlier family. So after she's died, her Culver family, or the descendants of a Culver family, want to get back in touch with their half siblings and so on. And so they show up. There's some correspondence, they show up. And everyone sort of says, well, yeah, that must be mom, all right, but boy, that sounds like a strange story. And one of the people from the Culver family remembers that when she was very small, her mother had a locket that she had brought with her from Germany, and that she was playing with the locket and broke it somehow. And the person from Tyosa says, I have that locket, and goes in the back and brings it, and not only does she talk locket, but it's still broken in exactly the same way. So Frida's locket provides the final piece of evidence that these two families really were related to each other. So there you go, and I'll hand over to Josh.
Okay. I hate to say it, but well, let me just click it and then I'll say something. Legacy of Sin, if you can see that.
Sometimes I just can't believe how grown up and handsome you are. You're always such a scrawny little skinny thing.
Yeah, well, maybe if I had a home-cooked meal sometime.
I get nature with friends. My wedding day.
Whatever happened to Carl Steele? I liked him.
You know, I liked him too. I did. Sometimes these things just run their course. It's a painful business, divorce. And you know what? I just don't want to talk about it right now.
Whatever happened to Carl Steele? That's the question. I hate to say it, but this lady kind of makes Emma Lawrence look like an amateur. Bonnie Bedelia there, Neil Patrick Harris are portraying people that tie in pretty closely to Culver and Marshall County, even though they tie into a lot of other places as well. Jill, there's Carl Steele up there. We'll talk about him in a second. Jill, I'm going to mispronounce her maiden name. It's either Billiot. It's, sort of Frenchish. So anyway, that was her maiden name. She's originally from Louisiana, and she first gets married after dropping out of high school. She marries a second husband, files divorce soon after from the first one, and she marries William Coit in 1966 while still married to her second husband. We know her as Jill Coit, so she kind of keeps that name somehow. That's the one that she's still probably the one. I don't even know if it's a legal marriage. Anyway, William Coit, this third husband, is shot in the back and killed allegedly by an intruder in 1972. Police all along suspected Jill, but they couldn't prove it. There's a whole thing. You can look if you want to dive into this sordid story, you can do that. Shortly after that, she persuades a wealthy older man to adopt her in California and inherits a lot of money. She marries another man for 2 more years prior to twice marrying and twice divorcing one of the attorneys who represented her in the investigation of William Coit's murder. So, while still legally married to her 5th husband, she marries Eldon Metzger in Ohio, and in 1983, she marries Carl Steele. So now Carl Steele has a deep, long involvement in Culver Military Academy. He's going to be the commandant of cadets for several years. I realize I didn't write down his full CV here, but he's a very well-known figure in Culver's history in that regard, and he leaves the academy and comes back as commandant, and we have an honorary saber in his name. I mean, he was a well-loved person and teacher. Actually, I believe he's an ordained Lutheran pastor. Anyway, there's more pictures of her. Jill's marriage to Carl lasted longer than most, so there you go. But it still ends in a bitter divorce with a lot of messy financial entanglements, many of them worked out in a courthouse just up the street here at Marshall County. And again, we go into all this detail. Carl believes that she tried to kill him later in the marriage, once by poisoning his morning coffee, causing him to pass out while in class teaching at the academy, and once by hiring someone to run him over while he rode his bike in Culver, like you do. By 1991, and I don't mean to make light of it, it's just so crazy. By 1991, she's living in Steamboat Springs, Colorado, and she's eventually going to marry her 8th husband, there on the right, Gerald Boggs. If you're going to do it, just do it fully. Boggs' brother hired a private investigator who unearthed that her entire life was a complete scam, kind of like someone else we just heard about, from business to marriages, and the marriage is annulled. So she briefly marries for a 9th time before starting a relationship with Michael Backus, there he is, and convincing him to help her murder Boggs. In October of 1993, they murdered Boggs and they fled to Mexico. When you see Neil Patrick Harris, the actor there portraying her son, his son Seth, he's a key figure because as much as he loves his mother, and he actually attended Culver Academy for a while, he's seeing what's happening, and he's the guy who really makes it possible to catch her. So, she had confided to him about the murder, and he and his brother William's courage were essential as there was no physical evidence to convict her. So the two brothers really, that's not them on the screen, but the two brothers really are, we give them credit for doing a hard thing and turning in their own mother. And this becomes, as serial killers sort of stories do, becomes a big deal. Evidence and testimony at her 1995 trial, she begins making plans to murder Boggs as early as the summer of '93. So she's convicted of first-degree murder and conspiracy to commit first-degree murder, sentenced to life without possibility of parole, plus an additional 47 years on the conspiracy charge. So she's, as you can imagine, still there. Still, as far as I don't think she's passed away in the last few months or anything. Michael Backus, her accomplice, is also convicted and sentenced to life, and she's currently serving her sentence at Denver Women's Correctional Facility, and all her appeals have been exhausted. So she has repeatedly attempted to find a new husband via the internet. I don't know that she's been successful, but the internet wonders never cease what can happen. But there's the TV movie, whatever, Legacy of Sin. I just showed you the clip from, that powerful masterpiece of cinema. And then these potboiler books like Poison Vows and Charmed to Death. She mates and then kills. So she's certainly probably the most infamous of all the women we feature here. In a completely different vein, to the credit of this lady, Irene Eleanor Tash was her maiden name, Tash, and she becomes Hofer. She's born in Chicago, grows up with her parents, two older brothers, Philip and Kenneth, and three sisters, Lorraine, Marilyn, and Maxine, on their farm near Culver. The family endures a lot of hardship when their oldest brother, Philip, is killed in Normandy during World War II. And her father passes away also at a young age, so there's a lot of family tragedy. And you can see here, this is the Culver Citizen headline at the end of the war, and Philip Tash is one of the Gold Star, one of those who've lost their lives from Culver in the war. Now, Irene has an aptitude for mathematics and a really intense interest in astronomy, space travel, and aeronautics. Now, mind you, this is back in the 1950s, right, 40s and 50s. So her fascination with rocketry led her to enroll at the School of Aeronautics and Astronautics at Purdue, which is a really unconventional choice for a woman in the 1950s. You can see the little headline there from the Culver Citizen. She was the second highest scholar there at Culver when she graduated. The sole woman to graduate from her program in 1958, Irene is going to be recruited to the missile test facility at Point, I'm going to mispronounce this, Mugu, California, where she worked as an aeronautical engineer. And while there, she's going to meet her husband, future husband, George Hofer. They have two daughters. Her work takes her to remote locales, including the Midway Island and Trinidad, as well as domestic rocket launch sites like Cape Canaveral. She spends a lot of time working at the Pacific Missile Range facility in Hawaii, where she develops a great affection for all things Hawaiian. And although she faced some adversity during her early days in her career as one of the few women in the aeronautical field, she was quite dedicated and continued to work until just shy of her 80th birthday. So she's a member of Sigma Xi Scientific Research Society, the American Institute of Aeronautics and Astronautics, and she died unexpectedly at age 89 on October 28th of 2021. And so there's actually an Irene E. Hofer STEM Scholarship Fund in the Ventura County Community Foundation. So again, she's somebody who really, credit to our friend in the Historical Society down in Culver, Cheryl Fujimura, who just brought me this obituary and said, did you know about this? It was a few years ago, a handful of years ago. Did you know about her? No, I don't think many of us did. And so, it's really a remarkable kind of hidden story. She certainly was known in her field, obviously, and in her community, but, pretty amazing. And our last story is really just also amazing. So to try to sort out the names, Major Charles Reed is a graduate of Jefferson Medical School in Philadelphia. He actually had served as a medical missionary in China. That's him on the left. He becomes a surgeon lecturer at Culver Military Academy in 1911. And he served up right up to his death on New Year's Eve in 1928, so Dr. Reed. He had been the president of the PTO in Culver, Chamber of Commerce officer, all that. So he was very involved in the community as well as the campus there at the academy. One of his 5 children is Dr. Donald Reed. He graduates from CMA, Culver Military Academy, in 1918. He's going to serve in the Air Corps in World War II, and as a physician in the town of Culver for nearly 30 years before he dies in 1961 at age 60. Anybody from the Culver-area might remember the Reed Medical, the doctor's office there on College Avenue, kind of across the street from St. Mary's Church. His nephew, Dr. Donald W. Reed, continues in the practice, serving for 6 years in Culver. Donald W. there on the right dies in 2012. Donald W.'s father, Arthur Reed, died not long before Don Reed did in Culver in 1961. And I'll just throw in his daughter, Winifred Joyce, was my neighbor growing up and one of the pioneers in Culver's EMS service, where she served for 30 years. So this family has got quite a medical history in Culver. But again, one of these stories that someone sort of had to come bring to us that we didn't know was about Emily Reed. So Emily's born in 1911, actually in Asheville, North Carolina, though she only lives there 1 year. She attends Culver Elementary Middle School, and then she goes to Miss Frances Scheimer's Girls' School at Mount Carroll, Illinois, before going to Ohio Wesleyan for university, as well as Indiana University and the University of Michigan, where she's going to study library science. Now, she's the daughter of Dr. Reed, the first one, who was the academy physician. So Emily's going to, as I say, really go into library science. And so she works at a number of libraries. She works at Florida State University, Detroit Public Library. She works in Hawaii in a library, as well as the State Library Agency of Louisiana. After leaving Louisiana, she's appointed director of the Alabama Public Library Service Division in 1957. This is where her sort of claim to fame is going to happen. Soon after she becomes director of that library, segregationist legislators in Alabama, especially Senator E.O. Eddins, begin to scrutinize the collection of the library, attacking holdings that are integrationist or communistic, right? So, we're back to talking about integration, right, and mixed marriages. And of all things, unlike the actual mixed marriage of human beings, this is about bunnies. Controversy surrounds this children's book, maybe some of you remember it, The Rabbit's Wedding. This is a book by Garth Williams. So if you've read the Little House on the Prairie books, the earliest editions didn't have his art, but most of the editions of those books that we read growing up would have had Garth Williams' art in them, the sort of black and white sketches. And the story is about a black rabbit marrying a white rabbit. Now, as far as we know, there's no reason to think that that was actually on his mind, that racial integration was on the mind of Garth Williams when he wrote this book. But Senator Eddins and the White Citizens Council take the story to have those implications. And so they demand that it be removed from the shelves of Alabama libraries, and suggested Reed had put stock in racial incorporation, air quotes, and said the book should be burned. So the library system banned the books from all libraries in Alabama. So Reed says she enjoyed the book, and she complied to the extent that she moved it away from general circulation. She put it on reserve, which means available upon request. It's still accessible to local librarians, so that's not a ban on the book. So she says, her quote, "We have had difficulty with the book, but we have not lost our integrity," because they have maintained it in the collection and all that, but kind of pushed it to the side a bit. But before the year's over, segregationists again find fault with her because she distributed a reading list that included various controversial titles, including Martin Luther King's book, Stride Towards Freedom. So I just sort of speculate about this a bit. When she's in school in Culver, she's in Culver Elementary and Middle School, as I mentioned. So she's here right along the time when this happened. This is 1922. One of the, if you've driven down School Street in Culver, you've seen this bronze plaque that the Historical Society put up that talks about a couple of major stories relating to actually to basketball. But this one is about one of the earliest integrated basketball teams in the state of Indiana. We thought it was the earliest for years, and we found a little earlier one in Indianapolis. Is the 1922 Culver High School team with 2 black players on it. Whitted and Wade. So all this to say, we know there was a thriving black community in Culver during this era, which again ties in with John's story about Frida's Locket. And so Emily certainly would have been classmates with some of these people's children. So who knows exactly what influenced her to really take a stand on this book and its implications, but I'm going to say Culver has some credit there. So in 1960, she leaves Alabama to become a consultant. By the way, this made national headlines, this story out of Alabama. I mean, you know, mostly Alabama probably, but it made some national headlines. So she goes to become a consultant with the library system in Washington, D.C., where she works for 6 years. She retires in 1977 from the Enoch Pratt Free Library in Baltimore, and she dies in 2000. In its 2000 Midwestern meeting, the American Library Association's Intellectual Freedom Committee resolved to recognize and applaud Emily Reed's courageous stand. Ms. Reed had been a charter member of the Freedom to Read Foundation and a member for 61 years of the American Library Association. And again, what really brought this story to our attention, and by the way, if you didn't see, you can see these headlines. This is New York Times. They have this big headline. You know, New York Times has a lot of obituaries, right? But there's a headline about Emily Reed and her kind of role in this, as they put it, racial dispute when she died. She's got a headline in the Los Angeles Times. She's, you know, you can just sort of see she actually made this pretty significant impact due to that stand. How did this story come to us? I had never heard it. I got an email several years ago from a playwright named Kenneth Jones, and he's written a one-set, 6-actor play that premieres in January 2015 called Alabama Story. It starts in Salt Lake City, Utah, but it's actually going all around the country, at least 45 cities by 2023, including New York City. And he's written the play based on reading her obituary in the New York Times. So again, not knowing this story, here comes someone from out of town who's written a play about her life, and that's how we find out about it, and all these ties to local names and local figures. So it's kind of a neat, so again, you know, that kind of wraps us up, but John and I conceived this several years ago as, you know, some of these stories are happy, some are not so happy, but little known ladies, these impactful women in Culver's history. Questions?
All right.
Yes.
The first one, the woman, you said that none of the things were true. What date was she, or what year was she actually born? Because you said 1981, and she was married when she was 10 years old then. Is that correct?
So,
My best guess, if she had been married, I think it's 1859 is the date on her tombstone for date of birth. And so if she had been born in 1859, she would have been 12 when she married this 30-year-old gentleman. Her newspaper obituary said that she was 16 or 17. Newspaper records said 16 or 17. The LDS, the Latter-day Saints genealogical things, say that she was born before 1850, but they don't cite any evidence. If I had to just guess, my guess is she was born in 1849, and she just fudged it by a decade. But I don't know that that's the
Didn't it say
exact date.
1871 when you had the slide up there?
No, I don't think so. Well, conveniently enough, we can back up. So, yeah, so go, no, 1, 2, there we go. So, yeah, I don't know, no. There we go. Yeah, I think 1870, so 1871, was, off the top of my head, is the first time we see her recorded under that name. I think that's why I said that. But no, it actually says on the gravestone, 1859 to 1900, whatever that is, 1908, yeah. Yeah, 6.
I saw the 1871. I figured she was married in 81.
Yeah, no, that was my mistake. I shouldn't have written it that way. Yes, Bill?
where's that house?
That house, if you go to it's at the top of, I was getting confused, Coolidge or Harding?
Harding.
Top of Harding Court. So if you go down Lakeshore Drive and you think about where the fire station is now, a block this side of it is Harding, and at the top of that hill is this building, the house / hotel.
Wally Helber's house.
The Wally Helber lived there for years and years.
They knew Helber, the
Yeah.
teacher.
When my great granddad, so that the original edge of the quarter-mile chunk that made up the original plot of Culver, Uniontown, Marmont, goes just along the edge of that. So when my great-great-grandfather sold off pieces that became the Dillon and Bedburn extension to town, to the north end of town, there was a 2-acre plot that was not sold off with the rest of the lots. And my great-grandfather got one side of that, and the Lords had the other side of it. So the Lord's house is distinctive for all those things. My great-grandfather's house is distinctive for being built too close to the street. If you drive up Lakeview in Culver, it's very obviously one full sidewalk, and it's closer to the street than any of the rest of them. And the reason is the street didn't used to go that far. The street stopped at his house, so he could build a house wherever he wanted it. Then when they put Lakeview Street through, it was too close. Because you can see his house easily by driving down Lakeview. But that's the neighborhood they were in.
Ace's brother came to Culver?
So Ace, these are all Ace's in-laws. So Ace Bird, the honest man in the middle of this
Yeah.
strange family. So his brother-in-law, Bruce, came here, along with his mother-in-law. She had been widowed because the father died of Huntington's disease. And his sister, Virginia, who had an illegitimate child that I didn't want to get into because it made it too complicated. So they were all living in Culver for most of this story. But Ace was the only non-Miller character besides Frida herself.
So, the brother-in-law, how was he related to Ace?
So the brother-in-law is married to Ace's, I'm sorry, let's start again. Ace is married to Elsie Miller, and Bruce Miller is Elsie's brother and the husband of Frida. Yeah, I had a little diagram, but I didn't think to put it in the thing. It's much easier when you're looking at it than when you're trying to talk about it. Anything else? Thank you very much.